You're listening to Living It Up in Lion City, a podcast about Singapore, where locals and foreigners sit down, chill, crack open a beer, and talk about life here and what goes on in this amazing city. Hello, Internet, and welcome to yet another awesome episode of Living It Up in Lion City, a podcast about living and loving this amazing city called Singapore. It's just a bunch of friends having a beer and talking shit. I'm Rindo.
And I'm Raj.
And we're here to talk about the topic of episode 8, which is
Singapore's folklore.
So, Raj, we've been doing a bit of reading about Singaporean folklore as part of preparing for this episode. Why are we covering this?
Well, to be honest, I think it's basically part of Singapore. So every country has their own historical legends.
Right.
Some legends might be true, some might be not.
Yeah.
And that's why we are doing it, because that's I guess most of us in primary school or secondary school will have actually heard about these legends.
Yeah.
But do we actually pay attention to it?
Right. And as a foreigner, what I've noticed is that, we don't hear much about these things. There are certain stories which are more popular than the others. And, I see these in...
Like what?
Like the story of Sang Nila Utama, for example, which is part of travel brochures.
Oh, dude, it was in 9th of August, SG50. That was one of the major storyline in NDP,
The National Parade.
Yeah.
Right. And if you go to the Merlion statue in Sentosa, if you go inside, there's this presentation that they show.
I've never been there.
Oh, it's like an animated, retelling of what Sang Nila Utama saw. And,
So he saw a Malayan?
Well, he saw... But yeah, let's we will get into that, right? Speaking of Singaporean folklore, as a foreigner, we don't hear much about this. And oftentimes, we just hear about... the modern history of Singapore. Essentially history that starts from...
Raffles. So Stamford Raffles.
Stamford Raffles, right? But what is interesting was that, after conversations with you, Raj, and after, Googling stuff and, doing
and
some
watching
research,
a documentary.
Yes. After doing all those things, we realized that there's a whole bunch of stories, legends, and possibly, historical narratives that that have happened that go way further than, what is popularly known, right? I'm curious to know more about this, and hopefully for those who haven't really heard about these stories, hopefully this is instructive and entertaining, or at least as instructive and entertaining as we thought it was when we did research for it.
Oh, dude, goosebumps, man, when we were doing it.
So,
I mean, okay, not doing it, but doing the research.
Mind out of the gutter, Raj. Mind out of the gutter. Let's get straight to it. So Raj, as a Singaporean, tell us about what is the popular story of Sang Nila Utama?
As much as I knew before doing our research was that he came to Singapore. He saw it off an island, came to Singapore, and from then on, it was known as Temasek, and then it changed to Singapura because he saw a lion. Because he saw a lion, and that's why. And
like Singapura is essentially Sanskrit for lion city.
Yeah.
Right?
In a sense, I mean, back then, Sanskrit was, I guess, around Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
India.
Right.
I'm not sure whether it was beyond India.
So, based on the historical records that I was reading about, the Southeast Asian region, and notably the Indonesian region, was under the rule of the Sri Vidhyaa kingdom, which had ties with, civilizations all across the world. The Sri Vidhyaa kingdom was a seafaring nation. So they've had massive boats and shit like that.
So they were like the Vikings of Asia.
No shit. And they actually went to different islands. They conquered the whole thing, and they were very big on trade. So they had connections with...
Okay, so they were not like the Vikings. They were like the British.
Well, let's not be too unkind to the Srivijaya kingdom by comparing them to the British colonialists.
Unkind, and I thought I was being kind, man. I thought the Vikings were more brutal and
Well,
ruthless.
as an Indian, I have very uncharitable perceptions of British colonialism, but that's a story for another time. So Srivijaya kingdom, of course, had ties with the Indian Empire at the time, and from what I understand, Sanskrit was the language of royalty and was spoken by people in the upper classes of
So like the Queen's English, and imagine Game of Thrones, if you will.
I haven't seen Game of Thrones, so like
Bullshit.
I don't watch Game of Thrones. Like, it's
So
too
there
serious
was
to me.
there was a scene whereby. There was a scene whereby Arya was saying "my lady" instead of or my lord instead of saying "me lord,"
Okay.
and someone over there basically said, "How are you educated and stuff?" Because that is the language of the upper tier or upper class people.
Right. And so Sanskrit was that wasn't that
Right.
level. At
Okay.
least that's from what I understand. Long story short, the story of Sangnala Uttama is something that I've heard too. It is something that is seen in when you go to Sentosa, when you go inside that giant Merlion statue, and they have this presentation of sorts. What really fascinated me about Sangnala Uttama's story was that when I started reading into the Wikipedia entry, it took me to the source from where the story comes from.
I'm guessing NLB.
Yes. So the National Library Board's website has the original text from which the story of Sangnala Uttama comes from. Now, a lot of these stories and legends source is from a historical chronicle called the Malay Annals. This is a compilation of stories and historical chronicles of Malay kings at the time, which, if I remember correctly, was dated to at least the 13th century, but it talks about stories and kings from way before that. So these were stories that were transmitted orally, by word of mouth across generations, and then there were some historians who decided to, put them in text. And many centuries later, a British dude called John Leyden translated it in 1852, and that particular treatise is available in the National Library Board's website. It's called the Malay Annals. It makes for very interesting reading. It has about 30 chapters, and the story of Sangnala Uttama shows up in chapter 3.
Yeah, it's funny how you just read it like pretty recently and you can remember which chapter it was at.
It blew my mind, Raj. Like, it was some crazy fucking shit. Like, I'm not going to get into details about what happens, like, before that. There's some crazy stuff about, kings exploring deep into the ocean, sleeping with mermaids, having children. all
For
of these
mermaids
things.
in the animal world, it's basically a manatee.
But, somehow children were born out of it, and... but that's something that we could probably cover in another episode. What I do want to focus on is the story of Sangnala Uttama, and from what Raj said and what is like popularly known in Singapore today is that Sangnala Uttama went to Singapore and stuff like that, right? The Malay Annals has a broader context around that story.
How broad?
Well, it talks about like how Sangnala Uttama got to Singapore in the first
Are we
place.
talking about the documentary that we saw, or...?
No, we're talking about like what's in the Malay Annals.
Okay.
Right? So the story goes that there was a king called Sang Sapurba, who was apparently this amazing fucking king. He was the ruler of all the lands. He was like the ruler of everything above sea level. And he was this awesome king. He was super rich. He was, known far and wide and stuff like that. So this king was in his fleet of 400 ships, and he landed at this island called Bentan.
So what was it named before Bintan? Was it Bintan all the way, or...?
I'm not sure, but according to the Malay Annals, it was called Bentan. It was Bentan. And the queen of that island, whose name was Parmeswari...
Sounds so Indian.
Yeah, and that was what surprised me about the Malay Annals too. A lot of these kings' names was actually a mixture of Indian and Islamic names. You have,
That's interesting.
right, this Raja Vikrama Sikandar Shah and stuff like that. So it's like so you can tell that even back in the day there was a fair bit of intermingling of different religions and communities, right? So that's also fascinating.
Yeah, that's really
right?
interesting. And I don't think back then we had this kind of religious wars.
Well,
if you
perhaps.
will.
But the thing was that there was a fair bit of mixing, right? Like, so for example, the word Shah actually means king.
Yeah.
But then there are rulers who are named Raja something something Shah. So it's like
King.
King Sikandar King. But yeah, back to the story of Bintan. So there was a queen of this particular island, Bintan, whose name was Parmeshwari, and she was so stoked that this king, Sang Sapurba, was coming to town, and she had plans to seduce him. She had plans to woo him and make him her husband, and be part of the larger empire. Now, Sang Sapurba wasn't having any of it. He wasn't really keen and stuff like that. So this queen offered her daughter to his son.
So she literally. What the fuck is wrong with me, man?
That's what beers do to you.
Literally.
Yeah.
Finally, I got the R and L right. So she just wanted to be in a relation, like no matter what type of relation.
Yeah. So I'm assuming she wanted this to be a political alliance.
Okay.
Right. So if not her, she offered her daughter's hand to Sang Sapurba's son, whose name was Sangnila Uttama. So King Sang Sapurba agreed, and let Sangnila Uttama marry.
So was this in the book that she was actually trying to flirt with her and all?
Yes.
In the Malay Annals?
Yes, it was. So Sang Sapurba's son, Sangnila Uttama, marries Queen Parmeshwari's daughter, and because of that, Sangnila Uttama becomes the king of Bintan. Right? So he lives happily ever after, and right before the father leaves to conquer foreign lands...
And never return again?
Never returns again. Yeah.
Wait, that was there as well?
Yeah.
Oh, good. What a good guess.
So the father gives the son a crown. All right? He's like, this is the crown. This represents...
Not the rightful crown. He's not the rightful king.
Right? So he gives him the crown and then leaves, right? So Sangnila Uttama stays in Bintan. He's in love with his wife, sticks around and stuff like that. And after a while, and I'm assuming this is many, many years later, Sangnila Uttama gets bored of living in Bintan. So he gets information from some other people that there is this island called Bemban.
Right. So this is way before he actually went...
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Right? So he says that he wants to visit this place called Bemban, and so he has to ask permission from the queen
But he's a king.
Bintan. Yeah, but the thing is that he's still living under the shadow of the reigning ruler, which is the queen. Right?
Right.
So... and so he asks the queen, hey, I want to go to Bemban. I'm tired of just wandering around Bintan. And the queen says no. She's like, why do you want to go to Bemban? There's nothing there. Stay here. And Sangnila Uttama goes, no, I'm sick and tired of this place. If you don't let me go, I'm just going to sit here and die.
It's either I'll die standing, die sitting, I'm going to die either way.
And folks, you got to understand, this is exactly how it's written in the Malay Annals. And so the queen goes, okay, all right, you're being super stubborn. Let's set up a vessel for you, a ship with all these supplies and stuff like that, and just go do whatever the fuck you want. Right? So Sangnila Uttama takes his, young wife, boards this ship with his hunting party and all this, his retinue, and they visit Bemban. They go to Bemban. It seems like it's a leisure trip. They're cavorting in the sand. They're hunting and then stuff like that. And so this is where Sangnila Uttama goes on a hunting party and starts chasing a deer. And
that's when I know.
Yes.
That's basically how it starts.
Yes.
That's a popular story. But anyway, do continue.
Yeah. So they shoot down the deer, and as they get to where the deer fell, it's like on top of this rock that's overlooking the sea. And as they get on top of this rock, Sangnila Uttama sees like a beach of white sands in the distance. So he asks his ministers like what that place is. And the minister says, oh, that's the extensive country of Temasek. And that's how it's quoted in the Malay Annals. So Sangnila Uttama says, let's go there.
Yeah, and we know what happens after it.
And they do, right?
So story goes that he goes there. But here's the thing which like really blows my mind after whatever you just said.
Yeah.
So he left his wife in the island. And he went alone with his hunting party.
He took his wife and his retinue with them on that same boat that they came from Bintan.
So why wasn't this not mentioned to us?
Well,
It's only mentioned Sanglina Utama and his hunting party.
Yeah,
and his men.
But apparently it was like the whole crew, like literally everyone who was in Bemban at the time, got on that boat.
Damn
right?
Historians.
Yeah. And so, as the popular story goes...
he got on the boat.
Yeah.
Went head on with a storm.
Yeah.
Apparently he thought he could win it. What a man.
I think there's like a reigning trend of how the Malay Annals glorify the actions of the kings. It's like, oh, he did this and he was amazing, and I think.
Yeah, but I mean, the story goes whereby they realized. Okay, this is the part that I read was that the story goes that he ran into a storm and his men started throwing like everything out to make sure the boat is light enough to stay afloat.
Right.
The last thing that he threw was his crown.
Yes.
And when the crown basically entered the water, the storm vanished.
And the ship, came back floating up.
Well, the ship was never down. It's just...
Oh, yeah. Oh, you're right.
It was just... Yeah. Well, it was just, tumbling all around.
Okay. And that's how they managed to get to the shores of Temasek. And once they, got off the ship and onto the shore, Sangnala Uttama saw something. Now, the popular story is that he saw a lion.
And we know that Singapore never actually did have a lion. What the fuck? Did he actually see that construed as a lion?
Yeah. Well, according to the Malay Annals, and I'm quoting this verbatim, there they saw an animal extremely swift and beautiful, its body of a red color, its head black and its breast white, extremely agile and of great strength, and its size a little larger than a he-goat. So there was some sort of creature that was red, black, and white that was larger than a goat.
Red, black, and white. What do I think of? Lion King, baboon. The baboon guy.
Well, man, those guys are blind. They can't tell the difference between a baboon and a lion. Holy shit. But so that is what was written in the annals, and so they see this particular creature, and the creature disappears into the forest, and seeing this large.
Yeah, because
party.
it was just a glance, like
exactly.
And yeah, he was probably tired after coming out of a storm, right. Like nothing to eat, nothing to drink.
He sees something and is like, yeah,
that's a lion.
Right. And according to the story in the treatise, he asked his minister what that creature was, because it's nothing like he saw. It wasn't anything of what he'd seen before. And so the minister said, according to the ancient legends, that creature looks like a lion.
So it was the minister who was stupid?
Yeah.
Okay, not stupid. Stupid is the wrong word. I apologize.
Well, what is interesting is that the minister, Damang Lebar Don, said that in the histories of ancient time, the lion was described in the same manner as this animal. And then he goes on to say, this is a fine place which contains so fierce and so powerful an animal.
But could it be a tiger though?
It could be actually. Cause
I mean, tigers were roaming all around.
The Malayan tiger was probably a lot more, prolific than tigers now.
And here's the question that really hits my mind, right? What time did he enter or reach Singapore? Was it at night, evening? Because moonlight plays a part, or if it's sunlight or sunset, it plays a part. Sunset, reflection from the water, what he sees.
That's true. That could also explain why
and that's why like orange becomes red.
Yeah.
I have no idea how black.
But Raj, you bring up an interesting point. The tiger's colors are a deep orange, black with a white breast, white underside, right? So it could be that they'd seen a tiger.
So, do you think we can conclude our own finding, our own research, if you say so,
that it was a tiger, folks? Everything that you learned was wrong. It's a tiger.
And this is just our assumption.
But whatever it was, they assumed based on past stories and past accounts of what a lion looks like, they assumed it was a lion. And apparently, Sanggala Uttama and his minister, Damang Labar Don, thought it appropriate enough to build a settlement there, right? But before they built a settlement, when the minister told Sanggala Uttama that this was, a lion, Sanggala Uttama sent a messenger back to his mother-in-law and said, I'm not coming back.
Holy shit!
And this is also there in Annals, and if you love me, you will send me people and elephants to build a settlement in this place that I just discovered. The Queen Parmeshwari gets the message.
I'm guessing she said no.
Oh, well, she conceded. As it turns out, she was like, okay, fuck it.
He's already there. What am I going to do?
Right? And apparently she sends supplies.
Were there elephants in Bintan back then?
That's actually a good question. I mean, there are Asian elephants all across Southeast Asia.
The closest one is in Thailand.
Also true. So, were there elephants in Bintan? That's a good story. That's a good question.
All right. Another time, folks.
Right? And with those supplies, with those people and elephants, etc., they built a settlement and they called it Singapura after the lion that they sighted.
So here's the question. Do you want to hear the question now or later?
Go.
So we all know before Singapura was Singapura, it was called Temasek.
Yeah.
But how did Temasek derive? Like, who gave that little island that we now know as Singapore, Temasek, that name?
That's an interesting question, Raj. How indeed? That's an open question, folks.
So we did our own research. We tried to go as deep as possible, but every single research or every single paper that we read started off from Temasek. Nothing beyond that. So how can a name be named? How can an island be named if no one lives there? So that means to say there was perhaps there's another side of Singapore that is we do not know and it's not written. But the only part that we know is Temasek.
That was called Temasek, and people knew that it was called Temasek.
Yeah, and we only know Temasek onwards, which was what, 1299, 1300s. So that means Singapore does have a history way beyond 1300s, but no one knows. It's just a grey area.
Those pages of history just was lost to the vagaries of time.
Yeah. So if you guys do know it, do drop us a comments or feedback or whatever, because we will try and dive deep into it.
And hopefully, have another episode about this. But Raj, what fascinates me about the story is that it wasn't just, a story of an explorer finding new land. There is some political context to it.
How political?
The fact that he had disagreements with his mother-in-law, the fact that he wanted to, on the pretext of traveling, he goes to a place and then he says, no, I'm not coming back. Does it point to some sort of tension? Does it point to the fact that he is sick and tired of living under the shadow of
the queen
and wants to create a kingdom of his own? And so he just goes out there, finds something and says, hey, this is my kingdom now. I can do whatever the fuck I want.
I mean, there could be that, and maybe the other part of it is because his dad left.
That is true.
And this is just my opinion. I'm like, if his dad was there, he'll perhaps think, okay, so after my dad, it's me, I'm gonna rule. But with the queen there, the queen could marry another person.
Perhaps.
And he will perhaps not be the king.
Yeah. So he's literally like the Prince Charles of back in the day, never destined to be king.
Dude, the queen never dies, man.
But yeah, so that's the thing, right? So there is some sort of political context, which brings me to believe that maybe the story about exploration is not about exploration. Maybe it's an allegory about someone wanting to expand and create something new.
Could it be expand or could it be running?
It could be running, because the chapter ends with, and thus Singapore prospered and became very rich. End of chapter. So I think the end is like a theme of, and that's how Singapore became awesome. So Like if you were to write a story about...
I mean that sorry to interrupt you.
Go on.
I think it's better if you just continue and then I'll just...
Okay. So like what I feel is that if you were a historian who wanted to write a story that would glorify, your
person,
king, right? You would write something about how this king went through a lot of trial and, decided to strike out on his own and, created something that then became awesome.
It's like Thor the movie, right?
Right.
He was vanished as the next in line. He was vanished. He came to Earth and he had to establish himself to be Thor, I guess.
So that's there is something to it. Once again, the Malay Annals isn't considered an accurate historical narrative simply because there are these stories which have mystical elements to it. Having said this, there is some basis in truth simply because the kind of places that are being talked about, the timelines of the rules of these kings point to something that did happen. So Sangnala Uttama may have well been, an actual figure, and this may have happened, but they couched these political machinations into a story that is palatable
and fictitious.
Yes, fictitious. Yeah.
Fictitious.
And it just makes for a better story.
Pleasing to the ear,
right?
Oh, the eyes.
Yeah.
Dude, the funny part about Sanglino Uttama is basically he's throwing his throne.
Yeah.
Not throne, but his crown.
Yeah.
Into the sea.
And isn't that symbolic in a way? Like he's saying
you're not the rightful king.
Or he's like, I want to break free of the shackles of,
It just reminded me of the Queen song, man.
I don't know that.
Seriously, I want to break free. Okay, another time.
I'm sorry, my knowledge of pop culture is not up to standard.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
I thought you were quoting a song.
Yeah, I was, but
okay.
Okay. You know what? Never mind. Yeah. So, symbolic. Yes. Based on the documentary that we saw, apparently, in a lot of cultures, it is symbolic to have. Would you say an argument with nature? If let's say if you are not the rightful king or whatever.
It would be, but I think it also represents the fact that whoever is the hero of the story somehow goes through an adverse experience and comes out triumphant. So it's like, oh, I have to sacrifice a crown in order to save the day.
No, but I don't think he was actually. I don't think any one of us would actually do it, or not say do it, but rather think about saving the day. We will think at that point of time, what do I have to do? You'll just, for example, in this case, throw whatever is heavy as hell, throw it out, make the boat as light as possible to ensure the safety of everyone. So it's just at the moment. But what really fascinates me is that he has to throw his crown, for the sea to come down.
That does point to something that sounds like they're trying to insinuate something that isn't exactly literal, So it's not literally the fact that the storm calmed down, but maybe they're talking about a metaphorical storm that was brewing in the region, and by letting go of his crown, the political storm abated.
Political storm.
Yeah.
Dude, you know what he sounds like?
Ass, guys.
Do you know what he sounds like? My literature teacher in secondary school. Oh, the curtain was blue, the wall was white. What do you think was going on in his mind?
It was...
Dude, the curtain was just fucking blue. It's my favorite color. That's it.
No, but I guess everybody has this need to want to get meaning out of something that possibly wasn't there. But I don't know, what, It seems like a fun story at any rate. And definitely more than what we, get from that fucking statue in Sentosa. Right?
What statue?
The statue in Sentosa where they talk about, Sangnala Uttama found a lion, boom, Singapore.
Right. Long story short, yeah, that's it, folks.
It was less about discovering the island and more about him not liking his mother-in-law. That's what I got from it.
And that's what I got from you. And now that's what you got from us.
But Raj, I think you had a more interesting story, from Singaporean folklore that you were super excited about.
Yes. Yes, because this when I was reading about this story, it reminded me of when I was back in, I cannot remember whether it was primary school or secondary school, but I just had like, flashbacks of like, oh shit, I remember reading this story, like a bubble forms and all that.
Okay.
So folks, this story goes about Badang. Not sure whether you guys know about this guy, but this guy is known as the strongest man in Southeast Asia, or rather the South Asia region. Story goes that he was out fishing. He was a fisherman. He went out fishing, and apparently in his net he caught, now it's either a genie or a water spirit. It's whatever you would want to think it of. It was a mystical thing.
Okay.
And that mystical thing basically told him that, if you let me go, I'll grant you one wish.
Okay.
And his wish was to be the strongest man. I'm not sure whether he said the world or the region or whatever he said. He just said, I'm guessing he just said, I want to be the strongest man. And the spirit or the thing granted him the wish. But the catch is, he had to eat the vomit of that thing. So,
interesting fetish.
I mean, imagine a genie. How do I get myself horny? Fuck that, he's gonna eat my vomit.
Fuck, okay.
So Badang actually did it. He ate the vomit and he became really strong.
I'm sorry. I'm just picturing it right now.
So he actually ate the vomit and became really strong. And word went around, like people from back then, Malaysia, Indonesia, and beyond came down to challenge him. Kingdoms from all over, or kings from all over, were not satisfied that how can this guy be the strongest when he's not even known. So he started beating everyone through like a challenge. And the famous story goes whereby the story spread all the way up to India. And a king who was like surprised that how could this guy from a small little island be stronger than my guy who's like from this massive piece of land.
Shit, is this like the medieval version of the WWE? It's like, damn, we gotta challenge that guy.
Yeah, so that guy, the king sends his strongest guy down, or whether, I do not remember whether Badang went up. Either way, they met some place. But I'm guessing the guy came down because what's gonna happen next is that they did a whole series of challenge. Not sure what the challenge was, but the final challenge was throwing a massive boulder.
Okay.
Like a massive rock. So Badang threw it so far that it ended up in the Singapore River.
Fuck, okay.
Yeah. It ended up in the Singapore River, and so apparently he won the challenge, and Badang was there, like in the folklore and the legend ever since. And then apparently on the rock itself there was like a scripture. I wouldn't say scripture, but like a literature in an Asian language that no one could understand.
Okay.
Like no one can actually decipher. No one could decipher it, and then came along the British.
And did they figure it out?
They basically had to, this is what is being said, is that they had to blow up that rock or that boulder to make Singapore River, or to make the river flow.
Okay.
So folks, you be the judge. I'm not sure how true is this, or how fake is this, but the thing is that we do have a piece of that boulder in the National Museum of Singapore.
Wow.
Until now, no one is able to, or rather, until now, no one is able to decipher it. Like what is that language? What is what? But it is just a piece that they found in Singapore, and now it's in the museum.
Wow.
Yeah. So if you can decipher it, that would be great, man.
Interesting. Like, what is the Badang story something that is? Do Singaporeans know about this? Is this a popular story?
I think it's pretty. This is just my opinion. I think it's pretty popular, but I'm not too sure because I remember it. I remember it because I read when I was really young, and I was really fascinated by it.
Okay.
No, not sure why I was fascinated. Maybe it's got to do with the format.
He's a dude who loves to, lap up some fucker's puke and,
Fuck off.
throw
dude.
stones and shit.
Throwing stones might alright. Have you not ever done that?
Well, not giant ones. But wow. I do want to check out that museum and see that.
Yeah, speaking of which, I've never actually been to the museum.
Okay.
And then again, in that museum, because of what I read, led me on to another story, and it just went on and on until I found out that they actually found a dagger.
Okay.
When they were trying to build something in that area. A dagger that would perhaps not been for a commoner back
Right.
then, maybe made for a royalty.
Yep.
And one of Rindo's colleague, he basically told us it's basically called a kris in Malay.
Okay.
KRIS.
And is this dagger? What is the significance of this?
I have
dagger?
no idea what's the significance. The thing is, they found it in Singapore. They found it in Singapore under I don't know, years and years and years of mud, sand, rain, grass, whatever.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yes, but folks, we are having beer, so mind the burp.
They know that already.
So they found it deep down in Singapore. They cannot date it to when it was actually made,
Okay.
and they cannot point it to anyone. And that dagger itself is in the museum.
Okay. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and it just fascinates me whereby Singapore history is rich. It's just that it's not documented like China or India or Europe or US.
Well, Singaporean history is not popularly spread out because there are no sexy Hollywood movies about it. So
yeah, there's no pyramids.
Yeah, there are no skimpily
Cleopatra.
clad women, reenacting historical narratives about Singapore. But yeah, that's interesting. Folks, if you get the opportunity to go to the National Museum of Singapore, do check it out, see what the story's about, and
Yeah, do not worry, we are not being promoted by this STB.
Yeah,
Singapore
no.
Tourism Board, not STD, but B for board.
Nobody's paying us, folks. This is all a labor of love. Wow,
Yes.
okay.
So, I guess the Museum of Singapore actually does have quite some interesting stories.
Right.
But, yeah, I've never been there.
Okay. I have been there before. It's just that it was very early into, it's just maybe right after I arrived in Singapore, so I probably didn't have the context that I do now. Although I would want to check it out now that I have, the rich narratives that we've been doing research on.
So the next topic I'm going to talk about is Raden Mas.
What's Raden Mas?
So based on folklore, Raden Mas was basically a princess.
Okay.
So a prince married a commoner,
Okay.
which the prince's father was not too happy about. So when the prince was not around, probably went sailing or went somewhere around the island or whatever, the sultan of the place sent his men down to burn their house down.
With the princess inside it?
Apparently,
Oh, fuck, okay.
apparently the story goes, the house was burned down, the mother died in the house, but the princess was saved because of a loyal servant. And the princess' name was Raden Mas Ayu.
Okay.
And when the prince came back, they ran away from where they were, and they came to Temasek. So it's kind of funny, right? The story goes Temasek, whereby Sanglina Utama was Temasek to Singapura. So do you think, Rindo, that this story is before...
What's
his name? Sanglina Utama?
Yeah, it's an interesting question because, based on the previous story, it was hence named Singapura, but then Temasek is still being used. So the question here is Singapura and Temasek used at the same time, or does the story of Raden Mas, happen way before that?
I have no idea. That's an open-ended question, and if you guys actually know about this, do hit us, and we'll love to, hear from you guys. And so to continue the story, how it goes was that when the prince landed up in Singapore, the Sultan of Temasek back then was excited. He was happy. I have no idea why he was so happy. Maybe he was a well-known prince, or maybe something did happen. I do not know what. And he actually offered his daughter, the Sultan's daughter, to the prince.
Right.
They got married. But apparently the princess who got married to the prince didn't like Raden Mas.
Okay.
She was not well liked by the stepmom. And when Raden Mas grew up, story goes that she was a really beautiful princess and whatnot. The stepmom actually proposed a marriage between her, I mean not the mom, but the Raden Mas and the stepmom's nephew.
Okay.
What's his name? If I remember correctly, it was Tun Bagus.
Tun Bagus.
Tun good, bro. But Raden Mas didn't like it. Didn't like the marriage proposal, so she said no, and that's when Tun Bagus threatened to kill the dad. I think the prince's name was Parangan or something around those lines. I do apologize if I'm getting this wrong. So what happened was she was defiantly saying no. She was like, no, I'm not going to marry you. But Tun Bagus decided to attack the dad, and to shield the dad from Tun Bagus, she basically jumped in front, and she got stabbed in the heart by Tun Bagus. And she died.
Shit, Tun Bagus was not a Bagus guy. Damn, dude.
Wow, names, bro. So, I do not know how true is this, and internet has showed me a couple of pictures whereby there's still a tomb. I do not know where is it, but apparently it's in the area between Bukit Merah. There was two more areas: Bukit Merah, Bukit Purmai,
Okay.
and one more area. I'm guessing is Fort Canning, but I'm not sure.
Wow.
So these three areas, and Raden Mas is in the middle of these three areas, and apparently her tomb was not say resurrected, but sorry, but her tomb is there. But yeah, it's only the internet telling me that the tomb is there. I'm not too sure. If you guys know, let me know. I'll probably go down and check.
So you're saying that it still exists, and
I mean, this is what internet tells me, and internet.
Yeah, that's also true. But now I'm curious. Like, if that tomb exists, like, is there Raden Mas's corpse in it?
I do not think we will want to be the one who actually
go all Indiana Jones and find out.
and even though if we actually do that, but how do we know is that person?
That is true.
I mean, there's no DNA evidence to say that's that person.
That's true. But then the very fact that there is a tomb there that could probably have gone back to centuries, like, is this tomb recognized by the authorities today? Is this a monument?
That is something I do not know.
Okay.
But I mean, if it's a monument, then I mean, I guess that would be a historical site.
Yeah. And why do we not hear about this? Holy shit! Like, we don't. At least as a foreigner, even though I've lived here for 8 years, there's a lot of things that I still don't know about the island, and this sounds something that we definitely should check out.
Sorry, you were saying?
Yeah, but you also mentioned that was the third area that you're talking about somewhere around Szilagyi, because I think you had a story about Szilagyi.
No, it wasn't around Szilagyi, but I do have a story about Szilagyi.
Tell us more.
So, there was a sultan around in Temasek area. The area, it wasn't called Szilagyi then; it was called something else. He basically had to retreat or run away because the kingdom was under attack. So he ran away, and he ran away towards Seletar.
Right.
And he ran away towards Seletar, got with his men onto a boat, went to somewhere, and never to return to claim back his territory. It was from Szilagyi. From Szilagyi, he ran to Seletar. Seletar, back then it wasn't what we see now, like, modern roads and all that. It was a muddy track or maybe forest in between, but he ran and ran and ran till Seletar's coast. Ran and never to return again. And that was, based on what I read, the date was 1377, 1377. And ever since then, the pirates came in. They made Mount Sophia their base, like where they stayed, where they mingled, and all that. And apparently, the pirates were called Szilagyi. So that whole area named Szilagyi is because of them. And the meaning of that word is a spear, a wooden sharpened spear.
Shit. Who fucking knew? For those who aren't living in Singapore, Szilagyi Road is a road, in the Dhobi Ghat area. And
Dhobi Ghat used to be a proper Dhobi Ghat.
Yep.
Okay, and those who do not know what Dhobi Ghat is actually a Hindi word for a laundryman area.
Yeah.
Where you send your laundries and they'll beat it to crap and make it dry.
Correct. But interesting. So you're saying that, pirates were a constant presence in Singapore?
Hey, Pirates of the Caribbean, right?
Yeah, they have that meme, right? Welcome to Singapore. I thought it was just a joke, but as it turns out, there is history to it.
Speaking of which, we watched that documentary, and even back then, they were like Chinese traders. Even before Sang Lina or Tama came in, there were Chinese traders. There were Indian... God knows what they were doing here.
Well, wasn't there that thing that you mentioned?
What I basically read was, I have no idea where I read this, but what I read was there was this king who came down all the way to Singapore and asked where was China.
Yeah.
And someone told him China is not here, it's above India or something like that. It's on the other side. And he left. And I guess some of them they were left behind. And yeah, I'm guessing the guy who wanted to wage a war with China, that king, probably went the wrong way. He got the wrong direction.
So you're saying that this Indian king was essentially, the Chris Columbus of his time, He went to find one country, found something else.
Yeah. So what amazes me is that back then, even before Sang Lina Utama came in, we had Chinese traders.
We had some Indian king with no sense of direction.
Yep. And we got definitely a few Malay folks.
Right.
So back then itself, we were multicultural and not just now.
And where are these stories? Like, are these stories lost? Are there any historical narratives outside of, what we know?
So we did watch a documentary, and they actually pinpoint to the guy 1377 who was a Chinese businessman, came to Singapore. He put his story down whereby, there were already Chinese traders in Singapore.
Yeah.
So if they can find that guy, and based on in China's history books, if they can find that guy, why do we have to dig so much to find this out?
Correct.
Why isn't it not just out there in the surface?
That is true. For context, folks, the documentary that we're talking about is called The Hunt for the Red Line. Links are down in the show notes. Do check it out. It makes for a fascinating watch.
Yeah, it does. It does. And a lot more questions will arise.
No shit. I'm going to go back home and, do some homework.
So, Rindo, you're telling me that 1377 has a significant impact on why Red Hill was called Red Hill.
Yes. Oh, this is probably one of my favorite
Bukit
stories.
Merah, Red Hill, whatever, yeah.
So this is the story of Bukit Merah, and this is also a popular story. I've heard the story from a couple of people before, and this story is also from the Malay Annals. It's in chapter 10. So the popular narrative goes that there was apparently a whole bunch of very dangerous swordfish that were wreaking havoc upon the shores of Singapore.
I know the story. Yeah.
Right? So apparently these swordfish were super lethal. They would, fly out from the sea and stab people, like slash them, cut off their arms and limbs.
Go back into the sea.
Yeah.
But how would they jump on land and fishermen?
That's how they do. They literally fly out from the sea onto the shore and cut off limbs and shit.
It cannot be onto the shore, man.
Well, but yeah, the thing is that this may not be an actual historical
account. Sorry, my bad. Maybe the beers are taking over me.
Perfect.
I do apologize on that.
Yeah, so the swordfish apparently were a big problem in the shore. They were killing people and shit like that. And so the king of the time, who was Paduka Sri Maharaja,
Wow, all these Indian names, man.
Yeah, so,
And mixed with Malay names. Like, dude,
It-
we were
yeah.
multicultural back then.
Right?
We were having interracial sex back then. Like, why all this stigma now?
But yeah, like this.
Were we more open-minded back then or now?
Oh, well, things change, I guess. But this king, Paduka Sri Maharaja, he goes to the shore, he's riding this elephant with his ministers and stuff, and he's trying to assess the damage, and he sees all these people literally split in half, spread across the shore. There's like blood everywhere, and it's super fucked up. So the Maharaja was like, what the fuck can we do? And apparently, according to the annals, the Maharaja orders his men to create a rampart. I don't understand what the rampart is in this context, because
What's a rampart?
It's essentially like a blockade, like a fence of sorts. But according to
Made
of his soldiers' legs.
The fuck?
Yeah, I don't understand. So it says that they made a rampart out of his men's legs. I don't understand what that means, but somehow I'm assuming that the soldiers were flanking the shore.
Like in the water.
In the water, and the swordfish came in and started chopping off their legs. So that wasn't working, and then the crowd.
What a dumbass king.
Well, once again, I don't understand what rampart means in this context, but it seems that it wasn't working.
No,
Right?
no shit, Sherlock.
So among the villagers who were amassing by the shore watching this, among them was a
Because you know what's the funny part? I do apologize
Go
for
on.
interrupting. Is that the king came down? He already saw bodies split into half, and yet he sent his soldiers to create a blockade.
Yeah, because soldiers are dispensable,
Yeah, but they're still like fucking humans, right?
That's true. But back then, I think kings could do what they want, and they're like super fucked up anyway. But yeah, so apparently that rampart of men's legs didn't work, and among the villagers who were watching this unfold, one of them was a young boy who apparently told the king that that's not going to work. You should just create a rampart made out of stems of the plantain.
Not plantain. What I read was banana tree.
Yeah, the banana tree is called a plantain.
Oh shit! Shit! Yeah, folks, I'm as dumb as possible.
But variations of the story that I heard was that it is bamboo. But according to the Malay Annals, at least the 1852 version that I was reading, was that it was plantain. So they sharpened these plantain stems, they created those stakes that they put across the shore, and as they did that, the swordfish would leap out of the water and impale themselves upon the plantain. But because of that, there were a ton of swordfish that were stuck into these plantain stems, and that's when the army, closed in and they slaughtered these.
Yeah,
these
so I
swordfish.
do not think it stems. Yeah, because if it stems, they can just leave them there and they will die.
Perhaps.
So if the army were to come in and kill them, I do not think it's.
Well, this is what
The
I'm
Malay
reading
Annals,
from the Malay
alright.
Annals. That's our source of truth. But but then at least it was effective, and so the army came in, slaughtered all these swordfish, and they were victorious. Anywho, the Raja went back to his palace, where his great advisors, confided in him and said that young boy is of uncommon intelligence, and he gave us this amazing idea when he's at this age. Imagine what he could do when he's older. He's a threat. We should kill him. And so the Raja was like, okay, let's do it.
So the variation of that, what I've heard was that the boy, because of that, became so famous.
Yeah.
The Raja felt threatened.
Okay.
Like really popular, he felt threatened, and that's when.
So that's when they killed him, right?
Yeah.
So that variation is that the boy had a house on top of a hill, and
Yes.
and so when he was killed, the blood of the boy drenched the soil of that hill.
Like all the way to the ground, like meaning like from above the hill all the way. Like he was like his body was like a volcano.
And so because the hill was drenched in that red blood, the story goes that that's how the term Bukit Merah or Red Hill came to be, which is a place in Singapore now. What is interesting about this story is that in the Malay Annals, the boy is killed, and that's the end of any mention of the boy. What they say is the king says, okay, let's kill the boy. And when he's killed, the boy was killed, but the guilt of his blood lay upon the country. That's like the only mention of, whether there was blood on the soil, right? It gets a little more interesting after this. Now,
Wait, isn't that supposed to be end because the end because that's how Red Hill was.
Yeah, but there's actually more in the Malay Annals because that chapter doesn't end there.
Fuck, seriously?
Yep.
Oh,
So
cool.
the Padaka Sri Maharaja, the king who caused the death of the boy, he went on to rule peacefully. He had, a bunch of children who succeeded him. Yeah.
And
Yep, I know. So the Padaka Sri Raja was succeeded by someone called Raja Sikandar Shah. Okay?
I don't know, man. The names just get to me, man.
Right? So Raja means king. Sikandar is a very Islamic name, and Shah also means king. So it's like King Sikandar King. So it's great. But anyway, so Raja Sikandar Singh was Padaka Sri Maharaja's successor, and so he ruled Singapura, and Singapura was prosperous at the time. And this guy.
Okay, so was this Singapura or Temasek?
It was Singapura.
Okay, so it's after Sang Nila Utama.
Yeah. It was, at that time. And he had many mistresses, it seemed, right? So he had like a ton of mistresses and stuff like that. He also had a treasurer whose name was Sang Ranjana Shah. And
I'm sorry, man.
But the story gets a lot more exciting because Sang Ranjana Shah apparently had a really beautiful daughter. And
the king wanted it.
Yes.
I mean her.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So the king,
my bad.
Yeah, the king was totally in love with her, right?
After having like so many mistresses
Yeah.
and a wife.
Yeah. So the king was super in love with this treasurer's daughter. And the thing was, his other mistresses were super jealous of this girl, right? So they conspired against the girl, and they told the king that she was unfaithful. They convinced this king of her infidelity. The king, Raja Sikandar Shah, he flew into a fit of rage and crucified her, and impaled her on a stake in a common market or something for everyone to see, to tell everyone that yes.
This was in the Malay Annals.
Yes, this is in the Malay Annals. So
fuck, I didn't know they will get that gruesome, but okay.
So this king had her crucified, nailed to a stake in a market area, and the treasurer, the daughter who just died, was super shocked about this, and he felt that the king was being unfair. If his daughter was being unfaithful to the king, could he have just dealt with it in a way that didn't publicly humiliate her, right? And this is important because he was so disillusioned with what happened because his daughter was just humiliated in such a way that he sent a letter to the Javanese king, the Majapahit kingdom, saying that
the biggest dawn of the place.
Yeah. So, and there is some context here because before Raja Sikandar Shah, the Javanese kingdom tried to invade Singapore maybe a couple of centuries ago. They weren't successful and they had to retreat. And so there has been this rivalry between the Javanese kingdom and Singapore, right? So when this thing happened where, the treasurer's daughter was impaled and, publicly humiliated, the treasurer sends a letter to the Javanese king saying that if you want to invade Singapore now, I will help you. Okay? Getting this message, the Javanese king sent a fleet of 800 ships and 200,000 Javanese soldiers.
How big were the ships? Like 200,000. So if you divide it, one ship had 8 ships had 200 people.
Yeah, so you have to understand,
Am I getting my maths right?
At any rate, the Javanese king. So this is a major seafaring kingdom. They've had very sophisticated.
Like Venice back then.
Yeah, no shit. It's just that we don't hear about it much, but apparently this was the case, right? So these 200,000 soldiers landed on the shores of Singapura.
200K is
right?
It's not small, man.
It's a huge number,
yes, exactly.
Right? And this is there in the Malay Annals. What happens there is that the treasurer, Sang Ranjana Shah, he opens the gates to the fortress of Singapura and lets these soldiers come in.
This sounds so Trojan.
Yeah, it is literally that. So there was someone from the inside, betrayed the kingdom of Singapura, and let them into the gates. What happened next was a bloodbath. The Javanese soldiers came in, it was absolute carnage. And according to the Malay Annals, the bloodshed forever tainted the soil of Singapura.
Wait, you just said that line for the boy who...
Yes, but this line is also used for that particular battle.
Holy shit.
You know,
okay.
so Red Hill may not have been about one boy. It may have been about the entire kingdom of Singapura being slaughtered, right? In this massacre, Raja Secunjara Shah, the king of Singapura, he managed to escape. So he fled. He knew that, this was a lost cause. He fled. He went up north.
Szilagyi is not north.
He actually left the island.
Seletar is not north.
He left the island. He left the island
Via
of
Seletar.
Singapura. Not sure, but according to the story, according to the Malay Annals, he left Singapura.
Holy shit! Wait, so the thing that I was talking about, like Szilagyi,
Yeah.
the king lost the war and ran to Seletar
Yeah. And he left Singapura.
and never to return.
Yep, he didn't.
So your story about the boy
Yep.
and this story about Szilagyi is interlinked.
Yep, it is. And
Holy fuck!
And Raj, it gets better.
Okay.
So he left Singapura and he ended up in a place called Muar. Muar is now a town in Malaysia. He sought refuge in this place called Muar, and he started roaming around for many years trying to find a place of refuge. And finally he found this one place which was, where he decided that, hey, I think I will settle
made
down.
my mistakes.
He actually felt that this is a place that he could finally call home. So after wandering for a while, he was like, I'm going to build my new settlement here. He settled
Alone?
down. I'm assuming that he fled not by himself, but with his, his small band of loyal supporters. And he built a settlement and he called it Malacca. Right?
The fuck?
So I saw the word Malacca and I'm like, okay, that's interesting. I go to Wikipedia and I check out Malacca. Malacca was founded in the year 1377 by someone called Iskandar Shah,
But there was no Raja.
who was the last king of Singapura.
Fuck! Mind blown, bitch!
And I'm like, I read this and I just take a step back and I'm like,
Wow.
fuck!
So 1377, folks.
1377, right?
Get your 40 numbers.
Yeah, this was so interesting because there is some historical context to it. The story about the swordfish may not have been true. It could have been an allegory to the bloodbath that happened, between the kingdom of Singapura and the Majapahit invaders.
Here's the fucked up thing that I would want to know. Why don't we learn all this in fucking history school? Why do we always sorry.
No, go on.
Just calming myself down because I was getting too excited over there.
Yeah.
So why don't we actually learn this in history? History classes. Why? I mean, why do we always concentrate on Japanese came in. Yeah, the British came in. Yeah, sorry. The British came in, Japanese came in, British came in again, and then kicked out from Malaysia. Why do we only start from 1819 and not before that?
But Raj, can I ask, was there literally no mention of anything before Raffles came in?
It's if I'm not wrong, I mean, I may be wrong, and please prove me wrong, whoever is listening, is that it's more towards Raffles came in, and then he had a negotiation with the king of whoever was in Malaysia or whatever. And they gave the British the land. I mean, long story short, too long, didn't read. Yep. and then that's how it starts, and then from then it goes on. But it never goes on like 1300s, 1400s. But then again, do you know that's a massive gap from then?
Yeah. So there's about 400 years.
400 years or 300 years of massive gap whereby it's just blank.
There could have still been something though, but from the accounts that the Javanese actually just literally obliterated Singapore.
Like the Japanese did. A repeat of history, huh?
Holy shit.
But the thing is we do not know whether it's a repeat of history or not.
Perhaps. Folks, if you ever have the opportunity to read the Malay Annals, please do. It is awesome. So the founding of Malacca it's intertwined with the history of Singapore, and it just further cements the idea.
So do you think all these folklores are folklores, or are they not folklores?
Here's an interesting theory that I've been kind of mulling over. A lot of these stories tend to have a fantastical element. In the case of Sang Nila Utama, it's the storm. In the case of the Bukit Mira story, there is the swordfish. What I feel is that those fantastical stories is kind of foreshadowing to the actual event that's happening.
But what about the Szilagyi story? There was no...
Perhaps, but the Szilagyi story sounds a little more real than swordfish or a storm that abates because a crown is thrown into the water, right? So I feel that particular fantastical story serves as a taste of what actually happened. It's like a poetic way of saying that it's like a poetic metaphor.
Right.
So perhaps the swordfish represents an invasion of sorts, and I don't know. I'm speaking out of my ass here.
The swordfish. Here's what I get: the swordfish is a metaphor for the mistresses. The young boy is basically the treasurer's daughter, who gave the idea, and the king killed.
Huh. Okay. I was thinking that the swordfish would be the Majapahit invasion. That was just
but then the young boy. Where would the young
that's
boy?
Also there. The young boy is the anomaly here, folks. If you can crack this mystery, please go to conspiracytheories.com.
And that website was just pulled from his ass.
But yeah, guys, it's this is like we are obviously just trying to make sense of what we're reading. This is something that we've never actually read before, and we just found about these things yesterday and we're reading about this today, and I am just shocked and surprised that this is we have all these crazy stories and it's not being talked about. So once again, guys, if you have the opportunity to check out the Malay Annals, do look it up. I'll put down a link on the show notes. Check it out. It makes for amazing reading. So yeah.
So we do actually have like a proper Bollywood movie going on here.
Right? It's got all the drama, intrigue with mother-in-laws and shit like that.
The sultans! No, I'm not going to let you marry a commoner!
Fuck. So we do enter to explore more about these folklores and legends and possibly, find a key to more about the history of Singapore beyond what is in the history books.
Before 1819.
So stay tuned for whatever we find next.
And do give us any feedback, any kind of comments, any kind of link that we can actually dive deep in or deep dive into it.
Yes, because we will do that research for you. Maybe. But, let's see.
Very high chance because we are fucking interested in this fucking topic.
Yep. And we hope you are too. Do follow us on Spotify. Do follow us on iTunes. We are on Stitcher. We are on YouTube. If you have a podcast app, we are on it. We are living it up in Lion City. This is Rindo.
This is Raj.
And we'll see you the next time.
Goodbye.